from RFN Studios, this is Radio Free Norfolk.
Could proceed then. The first item of business is the school reopening plans progress report.
September is coming up quickly, and as we've heard from the recent Grand Erie District School Board meeting, this September is going to look much different than what we're used to. Here's a message from our Director of Education for Grand Erie, Joanna Roberto.
I can assure you that our staff continues to refine our plans according to current evidence-based information, as we work with the Ministry of Education and the guidance of our local public health officials throughout this process. As we receive new information, we will ensure it reflects the needs of our communities in Grand Erie District School Board. Should direction change, we will always communicate these updates with you as soon as possible. We will also provide our families and staff with a startup guide later this week, and we would encourage you to continue to review our frequently asked questions as they will be updated regularly on our website. I want to ensure you that we are doing the best that we can for a safe startup, and we will get through this together.
As with every situation in this pandemic, we have had to become adaptable and try our best to find a path forward amidst the plethora of unknowns. We had a chance to speak with former Education Minister for the Liberal Party, Mitzie Hunter, and the official opposition education critic for the NDP, Marit Stiles, after the Ontario Conservative government unveiled their return to school plans for September. Here's Mitzie Hunter.
There's a lot to talk about right now. I have many concerns. I have so many concerns, John. I was pretty shocked and surprised when the government came out with its plan. It's a long-awaited plan, mind you. There's just barely 5 weeks left before the start of the school year on September 8th. And, one of the things that jumped out at me right away was that there were no meaningful class size caps for elementary classes and clear cohorting of those classes. And I was very surprised to see that because it doesn't take into consideration the variations across this province in terms of the number of students that are in schools. When I saw the plan, I just felt it was a disaster. I said, this is a recipe for chaos, because not only is everyone worried about their own safety and their own health, which we should, because there is still a pandemic and the risk is there. But now you're being forced to make choices without even fully understanding what the consequences of those choices are.
What are those choices for Grand Erie families?
For our kindergarten to grade 8 students, as you can see, students are returning 5 days a week to 300 minutes a day of learning. Within that learning model, teachers will be providing blended learning time, synchronous and asynchronous learning, just in case the model should shift over the course of the year. New to conventional learning, however, this year is cohorting, which applies to our students. And as a result, staff will be entering the classrooms for certain subjects like French, core French, and there will be no rotary in schools where this may currently exist. Parents can opt out of a full day return and have their children learn at home. Similar, though, to the full day return, it is a 5-day model. However, students will be clustered by grade with a virtual teacher in a virtual school.
The term cohorting in this context means that the same teachers will be around the same group of students to reduce exposure risks and to simplify contact tracing in the event that there is an outbreak of COVID-19. But how will this be possible for specialty subjects like French, where there are a limited number of teachers? And how does this make any sense with the quadmester model for high school students, where there are different students in your child's morning class versus their afternoon class? If a child in their school becomes infected with COVID-19 and they shared a class with a student in your child's morning class, you are still at risk by coming into indirect contact. The answer to these questions remains unclear.
The government, made it sound like it was a very simple thing. Parents could make this choice with the students to go to school or to choose a remote distance emergency learning situation. And then we're seeing also, as you're pointing out, communications to boards which is inconsistent with that. So they're going to try to nail parents down to register at the beginning of the school year, and it's going to be left to, I think, boards to figure out what the collective agreement implications are of all of this and how to deal with those issues that you just mentioned that are so complicated. And I actually think that's a really important point, because so much of this, in my opinion, is the government basically shirking responsibility and accountability for the return to school. So whether it's something like that, where they're not really being completely clear and honest with parents about what the issues are with this kind of model or plan, and they're forcing boards to be the bad guys, or frankly unions, there's a real lack of clarity, and basically, here we are 4 or 5 weeks out of school returning. Boards have been planning for something completely different, and now they're having to scramble to make this new model work. And I think when they fall short, which some of them will, it's going to be them that are blamed, when it should be on this government's shoulders for their absolutely unbelievable mismanagement of this situation.
While parents have been given a choice, Marit, Stiles, and Mitzie Hunter explain that things aren't that simple, and they are not happy with the government's plan, which they feel falls short.
Giving school boards enough time to plan and prepare, I would say that this minister gets a failing grade on that.
School boards have been tasked with coming up with 3 different plans originally over the last few months since school essentially wrapped. And they have done, from what I can see, extraordinary work to try to cost out that, imagine what's possible, come up with a plan. And the government, I would say, after having seen this plan that they put out yesterday without even waiting for all those other plans to be submitted, I don't know what they've been doing. They're essentially sending our children back to status quo in what are extraordinarily different times. When we look back to the fall and how parents were fighting to keep our class sizes reasonable, not have our class sizes grow, to stop the cuts to teachers and other education workers. I mean, when I look back at that and I think about where we are right now, it's extraordinary to me that this government would be considering sending kids back to that size of class with no supports. So, is it possible? I mean, I have to say, I did not see us yesterday coming up with being left with such a terrible plan. I would have hoped we'd be a whole lot further ahead. And this is absolutely 100% missing from the government's plan, is to maintain job protection, job protected leave and paid sick leave and benefits for parents until school and childcare until we're really through this pandemic. The government is in this new plan, leaving it up to parents to screen their children ahead of time. And I think the truth is that a lot of parents, may not feel they have the choice not to send a child to school, even if they're not feeling particularly well, because they don't have that kind of job protection. So we always thought that was a key element. We also need to include, as part of the plan, funding to keep the childcare sector afloat. Right now, the government talking about us having 90% of childcare spaces open. That is absolutely untrue. It's less than half. It's about 40%. And childcare centers are telling us they cannot open fully without more support. We were looking for more funding for school busing, which is such a massive issue in many parts of this province, so that we could ensure kids and bus drivers were safe on those buses, physically distanced. There's really nothing for that. We were asking them to look at, could they open other kinds of public infrastructure, schools that have been shut down or mothballed under the previous government. Maybe we open up some additional spaces and we actually, again, create more smaller classes. As I mentioned, collaborating, reaching out and bringing together the students, the parents, the education workers, the school boards in an advisory group to actually help guide this recovery. And we have not seen that kind of collaboration. We asked them to address the special and specific needs of Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities that are already, we know, disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And so those are the kind of things that, when we talk about more smaller classes, as I said, some of that means hiring more staff, more education workers, whether or not they're helping because there's a smaller class, or in this case, the idea that education workers, teachers would be expected to manage physical distancing, mask wearing, as well as all the infection control measures for a classroom, as we know, of like 30 kindergartners or 30 grade 2s or 3s. That is absolutely impossible, I would argue, talking to many of the teachers I've talked to. And so where is the additional support to make sure that our kids stay safe?
Another piece of the puzzle that isn't that simple is, what if someone shows symptoms?
With respect to COVID-19, staff and students, as mentioned earlier during the transportation portion, will be required to do a self-assessment prior to leaving home. Daily screening for students and staff is extremely important, and parents, guardians, and staff will be required to assess their children daily. And it is an expectation that parents, guardians, and staff are expected to keep children at home if they do not pass the assessment. Parents, guardians will be provided a checklist of items pertaining to daily screening, which will mirror the self-assessment tool currently available on public health websites. We're also working towards protocols with a presumptive COVID case or a suspected COVID case at one of our sites. Each work location will identify a designated sick room that will be used solely for the purpose of isolating individuals who may become ill or demonstrate symptoms throughout the school day. A kit shall also be present and used when a student, staff member, or visitor displays any symptoms or signs of COVID-19. This kit will be stored in the school's designated room. If a staff member begins to experience symptoms while at the school, they will report this immediately to the supervisor, and the protocol which we are working on with public health will be triggered to ensure that that staff member is properly taken care of. If a student begins to experience symptoms of COVID-19 while attending school, they will be situated in the designated room, such that ill students will always be directly supervised by a staff member. PPE will be worn by the supervising staff member, and parent, guardians, or emergency contacts for the child will be required to immediately pick up the child.
If one child in the home has symptoms, would all children in that home, so we could have students that are in elementary school, an older sibling in high school, would they all be expected to be excluded if there were symptoms from one student? I think that's probably for Superintendent Wazinski.
Yes, I believe our interpretation of close contact would be that would be one that would qualify as close contact. So they would need to stay home until everybody in the household has proven to have no symptoms.
We've trusted each other to self-screen in most cases throughout the pandemic, but parents feeling pressured to send their kids to school, whether by employers or for attendance records, with just a little sniffle, has been a long-standing problem. Now we must keep all of our kids home when one child fails the screening. What will this mean for school attendance? What will this mean for the staff this plan depends on being able to show up for work consistently? This is one of many unanswered questions, which leads to a ripple effect of others.
I have actually been advocating for a full return to school, but with, again, smaller classes and additional supports. And what we got instead was just everybody back to school, essentially. And the problem is that while, again, it really comes down to whether people can feel like their kids are safe and whether they're at risk. And if you have a family in particular who has somebody who in it is immunocompromised, a woman I know was saying, she's got a kid who's got to go to kindergarten, so class of 30 plus, and then those little kindergartnners are going to come home, and her 77-year-old mother is immunocompromised, and she has to work as a single parent. So what an impossible call that is, right? What an incredibly difficult call. And what we're seeing happen is, and again, obviously there is a choice here, but we are seeing overwhelmingly that women are starting to leave the workforce because in many families it's the women who will stay home, and absolutely. And we are seeing men too, but we are seeing that hit to the workforce that will in the end impact our economy. And so we know that that childcare and schools going back was a really essential thing, but schools and childcare going back that is not perceived and is not safe is a really big problem. And so again, it's that person who they want parents to self-screen and screen their children. We all know that parents make choices all the time. They may decide their child is a little bit unwell, but could make it through the day, and they can't afford not to show up at their workplace and lose their job. And so that's as we said, that's why we have to also, in any scenario, have those protections and benefits for all workers, so that they can actually make that choice for themselves and their family. We do need to have a significant investment, I think, in ensuring that childcare centers are able to remain open. We also have a space issue, I think, when it comes to childcare centers who still have, even though we're being told now they can move to much larger groups of children, they're personally still feeling that these distancing requirements, the infection control measures, the regulations that have been imposed on them aren't workable. And that's the other thing I'm hearing from childcare centers across the province, which is that the government's regulations, their protocols around infection control really don't reflect the reality of daycares. It's clear they're not really listening to the frontline folks because it just doesn't make sense at all. So I think it's both a funding issue, but also, again, really important that the government actually be consulting and collaborating with the folks on the front line and with the actual, nonprofit childcare operators who can tell them what's going to work and what's not. And I think that's why so many parents have been also still reluctant. Many don't have a choice, but I think a lot of families are still going to be reluctant to send their children back to childcare or to school. And then the rest of them who have no choice are going to be left at more risk.
This lack of true choice can arguably be seen in the numbers for Grand Erie.
We have received 5,715 recorded responses. Of those responses, 4,787 have indicated a full return to school, and 928, or 6%, have indicated that their child will be participating online.
Is this because parents feel COVID-19 is under control? Because parents feel their kids learn better in the classroom and it's time to approach getting back to normal? This could be the case for some, but it could also be that with work obligations, parents feel they have no other choice. Mitzie and Marit both agree it is not because parents feel reassured by the meticulous return to school plan from the Ontario government.
The minister, when he was being asked by reporters about his plan, someone pointed out, Minister, there are no new teachers in your plan. And he says, well, we put aside, $30 million. And if boards feel that they need teachers, they can use that $30 million to hire those teachers. Well, is that enough? Someone should have already done the costing on that to see, how many teachers can we afford with that across all the boards in all 4 systems that we have in our education. Is 330-ish new teachers enough to manage our system? And it's not. It doesn't cover even a small fraction of what is needed. We've ensured that there would be a teacher available for every classroom that needs one, based on the cohorting and the capping of 15 students per class. And that level of specificity and detail is not in Premier Ford and his minister's plan. And oftentimes what happens is that you get this half-baked information, and then they have to sort of flip-flop and change later on when they realize that, we've made a mess of things. We now need to clean it up. And that just leads to a lot of worry and anxiety amongst students, amongst parents.
So that's one thing for sure. We were looking for them to actually reach out and listen. And then the other thing we were looking for was a significant investment, frankly, because there's no way that you can bring back students, certainly into a smaller cohort. We want more smaller classes. And that's going to mean increasing the number of staff in our schools and teachers, as well as other support staff. And the fact that none of that was considered is really astonishing to me, because, I think that there is still there are many unanswered questions coming out of public health and infectious disease experts. I'm seeing today infectious disease experts saying, how could the government have possibly thought it was a good idea to throw all of our children, most of our children, into classes which are already crammed? And, so that's a major part of what we had suggested. Of course, we want the government to cover all the personal protective equipment. We had asked the government to really, quickly act to repair some of the school issues that we have. We have a $16.3 billion capital repair backlog. And so there's so many elements, but, honestly, I have to say I was actually surprised at actually how limited this plan is.
Premier Ford and his minister have wasted the summer. I know, having been education minister, one of the first announcements that I made was a $1.2 billion investment in school repairs. And the reason we did that at the beginning of the summer was because we needed to use the time while students and educators are not in school to do those much needed repairs and preparation. So oftentimes you use the summer to prepare for the fall start. And, there are many, the principals council and others that are saying, perhaps we're not going to be ready for September 8th because we weren't given enough time to respond to the guidance that the government is now putting out. It should have perhaps happened at the beginning or in the middle of the summer, not at the end of the summer, with just, barely 5 weeks to get all of this preparation done and in place so that we can have a safety for educators as well. Teachers are also concerned about their safety, and those education workers that work in, perhaps the front office or in the custodial side of things. And, everyone needs to make sure that they are safe and they're protected from this virus. One of the disappointing things is that Premier Ford has put forward a half-baked plan when it comes to a full and safe return for students in the classroom this September. And what the Liberal Party has put forward is a plan that was developed by talking to teachers, education workers, and their representatives. And that plan does require an investment, a $3.2 billion investment versus the $309 million that the government is proposing. And what that investment of $3.2 billion will do is to hire more teachers and source more spaces to reduce class sizes. So 17,000 new teachers and 14,000 new classrooms. And those classrooms can be located out in the community where there is available space. Perhaps some of that space that's not being used fully because many people are still working from home, and some things like conferences and gatherings have not returned to full capacity. So there is space that is available out there in the community that can be accessed for education and learning. Even perhaps considering outdoor spaces, outdoor education. I know that many of the public health recommendations is being outside is safer at this time, and instruction and learning can happen in an outdoor setting. Also hiring 10,000 new caretakers. The emphasis has to be on that custodial staff that will help to clean and disinfect areas in the school that are heavily used and heavily trafficked with students during the course of a day. And also smaller and safer class sizes, capping the class sizes at the 15 and making sure that there are clear cohorts of how students can come together so that they are safe and making sure that school creates a safe environment around our students to give parents the confidence that that their child is not going to be contacting this virus, and making sure that there are investments in public health in terms of contact tracing, as well as testing and screening to make sure the virus doesn't come in the first place. And in this environment, it's been very difficult on students in terms of their mental health and their well-being. So we want to see some meaningful investments in that as well. So the PPE side of things is going to be new. There's now the mandate to wear masks. So teachers and all of the folks inside of the school system will be wearing a mask, and that's going to be new, and it's going to be different. And do we make sure that there's a supply of those resources available? We should learn the lessons from long-term care, where we set all of these expectations, but we didn't actually make sure that there was a supply of PPE that was adequate and available in long-term care at the beginning of the pandemic to keep the virus out in the first place with appropriate screening and testing and protocols. And we should not make that same mistake in schools, knowing that the risk of the virus is still there in our communities. We should be doing everything possible to keep the virus out and to give people the peace of mind that their work environment is safe and that there are protocols and practices in place that are known and that are being followed.
Thankfully, the Grand Erie District School Board's plan has done their best to fill these gaps with the time and resources they were given.
Some of the highlights include investing in the classroom to support student achievement, as evidenced by an anticipated increase of 22 full-time elementary teachers, the addition of an experiential learning to provide effective experiential learning opportunities for students, an increase to the complement of designated early childhood educators by 8 FTE, the conversion of 2 educational assistants into 2 lead educational assistants to better serve our schools in special education. In addition, technology investments continue to play an important factor for staff and students to succeed. These investments for 2021 include an additional $432,000 to continue the board's long-term computer purchase plan to refresh technology for staff and students, $1 million in effort to complete the province's broadband modernization program, an additional $278,000 to support the growth for the long-term information technology.
Both Mitzie and Marit recognize the importance of investing in public education, and Marit worries it is the school boards and teachers who will take the fall for the provincial government's inadequate plan.
They do, but then at the end of the day, they're going to have administrative issues. So again, where did the government go wrong here? They're not listening. They're not listening to what boards are telling them. They're not listening to what teachers are telling them. They're not listening to the education experts. And so as a result of that, we're going to have a plan which is going to have enormous complexity. And again, I think really does leave boards carrying the ball, whether it's having to run deficits, which, legally, as you know, they're not really supposed to do. They're not allowed to do. In fact, it puts boards at risk of being taken over by the ministry. So I'm a big believer. Of course, I'm a huge advocate for publicly funded education, as you are, I'm sure. And we, to me, this gets all my spidey sense going. I know this is a government that has an interest in privatizing education and bringing in things like voucher and charter school programs that have been really devastating in the United States. And so I really worry when I see this kind of thing that, this will undermine, I think, our public education system. It will force people to feel like they have no choice but to homeschool their children or look at other kinds of, private outside options. And I think that the government's kind of relying on that here. And that's very unfortunate.
That we should have a commitment to public education. It is the number one priority of any government to make sure that the young people in this province have access to the best education possible. And that speaks to the future that we're going to have in our province.
Of course, the use of these alternative programs will only be a realistic option to people of a certain income level, which leads to another problem that will need to be addressed. The children who will become even more at risk of falling through the cracks in the system.
There is a gap. Not only is there a technology gap, but there's an income gap as well, and an equity gap in terms of people's abilities to provide that technology for students in the home, and that has to be addressed by the government. There needs to be first of all an understanding of where those gaps are occurring and making sure that the supports are in place for those areas where technology is just not available.
Every family and not every community experiences COVID-19 also in the same way. And so we're seeing a lot of public health data now showing that low-income families, low-income and disproportionately racialized, particularly Black communities in the province and Indigenous communities, are experiencing higher levels of COVID-19 infection. So that's, add that layer onto all of this. And then ask yourself again, if we end up in a situation where, so this is why we need to put those additional supports in place. And we need to also acknowledge that there have to be more support sometimes in for some, okay? So, but it is also why when the minister talks about things like, well, everybody has a choice. Every family has a choice about whether or not their child will return to school in this situation. So they're kind of laying it on families to make that call. And the truth is that is not a choice that many people in our communities have. Whether you can simply just not afford an option like a private tutor. I know there's a lot of families out there looking at things like these tutoring pods. So everybody will come together and, fund a teacher to teach a group of kids. Like there's people are coming up with lots of, creative ideas, which I understand. But I worry that is just going to undermine the whole system. And what's going to happen is that, families who really have no choice and frankly are have no voice in our system as well are the ones that are going to be forced to put their children in harm's way.
And again, the Grand Erie District School Board is trying to do their best, but without solid leadership and forethought from the province, it's an uphill battle.
We know that there is lots of questions with respect to our partners, our Indigenous education partners and Six Nations, but also our Mississaugas of the Credit partners who have made some different decisions with respect to their elementary programming. We want you to know that we are open and responsive, and we are working with you and with Six Nations Mental Health around how we can support and continue to work with having students come to school in class or in person, but also online if that is the student and parent choice.
There's a difference between the kind of online learning that many boards have already offered to students. I mean, my 16-year-old is taking a course this summer because she has to do that because she wants to take another kind of course during the school year. And sometimes you just simply don't have those options in your local board or school, right? So we understand that. And that's very different than what we have been going through over the last 6 months. That was what I would call, and others have said, is remote emergency distance learning. We do not have a system that is set up to provide, as you said, an equitable approach or access to that kind of education, whether it's no broadband or whether you're dealing with, even families where you have broadband, Wi-Fi, and even, a laptop. Many people are working from home right now, have often more than one child who's in school in a household. So those are all barriers to participation in online learning anyways. But when you're forced into it, when you really have no choice, then there become obviously massive equity issues. And so we know that students, from previous research, even in those other classes, those ones that are designed for that online component, have a very high failure rate, dropout rate. It's really only some very small number of students that can excel in those courses and get by. So I think that's, there are so many barriers. That's one of the big ones. The other one is we're not really clear how, when the high school students go back and then they have this, part of their schooling is in school and part of it is online. And the minister's saying, we're going to guarantee everybody some of that will be synchronous, which means like a live meeting with the teacher online at that moment. I don't know how the minister can possibly guarantee that. And we don't know yet who's going to be teaching those courses. If it's going to be the same, it most likely will not be the same teacher that they have in the classroom. It will almost definitely be an issue for students because, again, you're going to have more than one student in a household potentially. Parents also working online if they have access to online. So and so the timing of it, the scheduling of that becomes really impossible for a lot of students. And so I mean, this to me is an example of a minister and a government that don't care or understand or care to understand how education works, and are not listening to the education experts and the frontline folks who actually know, what works well, what works best.
One question I've had, and it's probably a specific case where a parent has called me, is that if we've got 3 children at home and they have one computer, are we able to supply them with 2 other devices so that all 3 can be on learning at the same time if they are required to stay home for online learning?
At this time, Trustee Worden, we currently only have the resources to support 1 device per family. As I mentioned in our presentation, we have depleted grade 2 to grade 7 computers to support the 1,850 families that do not have their device. That being said, our goal is to support the achievement of all students. So you mentioned that this is one email that you've received, and my recommendation would be for that family to reach out to the school, and so that we can problem solve what some of those next steps will be so that we can support those students' achievement.
With all of these I's to dot and T's to cross, overcoming the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic has been exhausting for all of us, including our children and school staff.
One of the things of the pandemic that has taken a very hard hit, and it's one that we're not talking about as much as we're sort of focusing on the public health aspects of the virus circulating, is its toll that it has taken on students and young people of all ages who have been separated from their schools, their classrooms, their teachers, and of course, their friends.
I can tell you that a lot of families, as you know, are not feeling comfortable, and some of those families are families with teachers and support staff, and they're going to be in a situation where not only are they, dealing with the anxiety, as you said, their own anxieties and issues, but also the anxiety and issues that their students have experienced, because a lot of those students have experienced what medical professionals are starting to call trauma. So anxiety, trauma. There are already were virtually very few supports in schools in any board in this province for mental health, to support students and staff in these situations, let alone right now. And the government keeps talking as if they're putting more into mental health, but they forget to mention that they cut children's mental health by I think 25 million. So we're barely catching up. And those teachers, again, I think a lot about the ones who are in kindergarten to grade 4 or grade 3, or let's just say kindergarten to grade 8. You've got a large class. You've got kids who are wearing masks. In some cases, are grade 4 and up. They have to wear masks, and you're trying to kind of police that, as well as the social distancing, as well as dealing with your own anxieties, as well as managing infection control, as well as dealing with bathroom breaks. I mean, it was hard enough to be a teacher in those situations. I really feel for them, and I think that what I'm very concerned about, truthfully, is that when teachers are forced to make this call for their own health and well-being, many of them may have to choose not to return under these circumstances for health reasons. And if that's so, who's going to take the blame? Is it going to be the government, or is it going to be the teachers? And I hope that we don't forget that it was the government that made this call. They could have made it work better by planning ahead, doing the good work and the hard work that was necessary, planning for more smaller classes, and they chose not to.
But again, the Grand Erie District School Board pledges to do the best they can with the resources that they have.
When we're considering the mental health and well-being of our students and staff, ensuring a physically and psychologically safe, positive, and welcoming return to school, whether it be face-to-face or virtual, is a priority consideration this school year. As you can see from this slide, supports for all students and their families and staff will be provided through a tiered approach. We will ensure that universal strategies and supports that are good for all members of the school community will be in place to start the school year. We know that for some in our school communities, additional supports may be required to support their sense of safety and belonging. And for others, a few, we recognize very specialized and intensive mental health supports will be necessary. These necessary supports for some and few will be provided via our social workers, our child and youth workers, consultations with our human resources department, direction for staff members to our employee assistance providers, and via our community partners. The key priority goals in Grand Erie in the area of mental health and well-being will be to provide supports and services to students and staff with the goal of building school and work environments that are safe, that foster a sense of belonging and optimism so that learning can take place.
While it's easy to point out all the gaps in these flying by the seat of their pants plans, we should never forget to show empathy.
Being a former teacher myself, I'm well aware of the amount of work that it takes to get ready for school in the fall. And with this added difficulty, I know the staff must be just working their fingers through the bone. So from me, a former teacher, to you, the staff, I just want to give a big nyawagoa, and that means thank you very much, because I know the amount of work that you are and have put in to date, and I know what's coming as we head into the school year. So I think it's really important that we recognize the tough job that is ahead for all of us.
And we must, of course, consult with the most experienced people in the education field.
Hello there, it's Radio Free Norfolk here, and we have some very important guests today. With everything going on and school fast approaching and parents wondering what is school going to look like when kids return in September, we decided to discuss this issue with the most important people, of course, the students. We sat down with some of the students in our social bubble to hear their thoughts. Thank you so much, Sloan, Ash, Liddy, and their parents, and to my boys, Tristan, Nico, and Kai, for their exclusive interview. So, guys, can you guys tell me what you know about coronavirus?
It's very sick and it's very sad, so you have to not go to school anymore. And I know you guys miss your teachers, and you guys are bummed out.
I know that it's a big world problem and it's affecting way more people than we think.
Coronavirus is a nasty virus like the flu. It sucks.
Yeah, 'cause then I can't go anywhere.
What do you miss the most about school?
My friends.
I miss going to school and playing with all my friends.
Do you miss like learning actually in the classroom?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about outside of school? What about like your clubs and stuff that you do?
I miss going to dance.
I miss going to school and being able to see my friends and just being able to socialize with people around me. I miss baseball because it's people that share the same interest with me, and now I can't do that now.
Did you think that you learned better homeschooling online or better at school?
At school. It doesn't even tell you if it posted.
Do you think that you learned more when you were home doing homeschool or less?
Less. No offense.
No offense. What do you guys think about going back to school in September? Like, do you feel safe if you guys just went back and it was just like normal? And if not, what sort of ideas do you think you guys should do to keep yourself safe at school? Or do you think you should stick to online learning?
Janitors should be cleaning every room every second. Everyone should be wearing face masks, even if they don't have any. The school should hand them out to kids who don't have face masks, and pretty much wash your hands after everything you do. Wash things that are washable.
Mm-hmm. What about recess and the play equipment and stuff?
They would be cleaned every after recess.
What, do you think you guys should have to wear gloves or anything?
Yes.
Yeah, gloves and masks.
So if you're touching a basketball.
Oh, do you think that they should go back every single day right away, or do you think you should go every other day, or say 1 week
every
and then
day.
do online?
So it's normal.
I want it to be the regular school days, but it's every other day. So same times, same everything, but masks, gloves if you have any.
Are you going to have your first day of school this year?
Yeah.
Are you excited?
Yeah, oh my God.
To all of the parents out there, we know firsthand this was a difficult decision to make, no matter what choice you made. There will be positives and negatives to every path we have put our children on for this school year. Do what you feel is best for your children, because no one knows them and loves them quite like you do. Take comfort in knowing that the Grand Erie District School Board has set multiple clear dates to change that choice if things don't go as you anticipated. And to all of the teachers and support staff, thank you so much for doing your best for our children under these unique circumstances. We know the pressure you're under and the anxiety you likely have while trying to put on a brave face for our children. We are all in this together, so let's give each other the patience empathy, and understanding to show this generation of children just how adaptable the human spirit can be.